Earlier today, the Board of Governors for the International Atomic Energy Agency commenced its 5-day quarterly meeting to address a number of key nuclear issues, including Iran's nuclear program. In his opening remarks to the board, the IAEA Director General Rafael Grossi expressed serious concern in light of Iran's latest spike in uranium enrichment since December, an increase of approximately 1 full nuclear weapons worth per month. So, while Israel has been dealing to deal with the proxies of Iran and have dealt them some significant blows, it's clear that the Islamic Republic continues to pose a threat not only to Israel, but to the rest of the world. Joining me now to discuss this and more, Victoria Coates, former Deputy National Security Advisor to President Trump during his first term. She is currently the Vice President of the Catherine and Shelby Coleman Davis Institute for National Security and Foreign Policy at the Heritage Foundation. She's also the author of the book, The Battle for the Jewish State, How Israel and America Can Win. Victoria, welcome back to Washington Watch. Thanks so much for joining us.
Of course, Tony. I'm jealous that you're in Jerusalem.
Well, it's beautiful weather here right now, but I will say that there's a lot at stake here as Israel is actually kind of retooling the IDF, a new chief of staff coming into the IDF agreement over the weekend for an extension of the ceasefire, but with an understanding that Iran is still the most significant threat that Israel in the Middle East is facing. What is your sense in terms of timing? Do you think that this is the moment for Israel to take the initiative?
Well, thank you for covering this story, Tony, because with all the hoopla here in Washington, no one's paying a great deal of attention. And I think the IAEA meeting that you described is critical for exposing what is going on with Iran's nuclear program. And President Trump inherited an Iran that was very different than the one he handed over to President Biden in January of 2021, when they were starved of resources. They had severe domestic problems. They were unable to fund their proxies. The 4 years of the Biden administration have made the mullahs in Tehran fat and happy, and they've poured those resources that they've gotten from illicit oil sales, mostly to China, into their proxies, yes, and that's October 7th, but also into this nuclear program, and they are enriching at such a higher rate than they were 4 years ago, and have made great strides with their missile capabilities. So the IAEA can't do much about it, but they can expose it. So then the question becomes what Israel is going to do about it and what the Trump administration is going to do about it.
Yesterday I was over in Judea and Samaria, and briefings by various governmental officials, and they're uncovering more advanced weaponry that's coming in to Judea and Samaria from Iran. It doesn't seem to be their wings do not seem to be clipped at all, even though they've lost a number of their proxies. They are doubling down, and there's some thought, it hasn't been proved, there's investigation going on, that the recent bus explosions that took place may have been a diversion for possibly another invasion coming from Judea and Samaria.
Yes, and that's something we've been concerned about for a long time. Congressman Chip Roy and I wrote about this in the summer of 23, that we actually thought the terrorist attack was going to come from Judea and Samaria. And so this is an ongoing threat, right in the heart of Israel. The weapons are being smuggled in through Jordan. It's a terrible problem. But just finally on the nuclear program, the one thing I did want to point out is Secretary Rubio yesterday released another $4 billion in arms that the Biden administration had been holding up. And that, there have been great words coming out of the new administration of support for Israel. That's a really material demonstration that they have Israel's back, and that they are not going to try to restrain the Jewish state when it's facing such terrible dangers.
Well, if I understood the Secretary Rubio and what he did in terms of the arms, you mentioned the dollar amount, but I think in comparison of the bombs, there was I think 1,700 that had been held up by the Biden administration, and I believe he announced 40,000 would be coming from the United States to Israel, and I mean that's quite a significant difference.
Yes, it's the mirror opposite. And so we're going to have, I'm sure, a lot of squawking from the international community that Israel has cut off additional humanitarian aid to Gaza until Hamas agrees to release the rest of the hostages. I mean, quite frankly, Tony, this should have been done a year ago.
Yes.
The amount of aid that's poured into Gaza is staggering. And, you've never had a situation where you're asking one aggrieved party, the attacked party, to feed the enemy while they're at war with them. It's really an extraordinary kind of oxymoron that's going on. But we have to put all pressure on Hamas now to let those hostages go. This is beyond any kind of beyond a joke that they're still holding these poor people over 500 days later. We've seen the kind of condition they're in. They need to come out now. And what the difference is we're going, rather than withholding arms and pressuring Israel to continue feeding the monster that attacked them, you're going to have the Trump administration rather wholeheartedly supporting Israel, both in this effort to pressure Hamas and also, as you described, with increased arms shipments.
Victoria, yesterday, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu agreed to the new U.S. kind of led negotiations for an extension of the ceasefire. But it also falls at a time when they're reworking the IDF, a new chief of staff coming in. I think this is allowing them time. One of the reasons they agreed to it is because they still plan on accomplishing one of their war goals, and that is the elimination of Hamas.
Yes, and I think that's the key point, that Hamas cannot be allowed to reconstitute itself and attack again, because that's what they will do. They've told the hostages that they released on their way out, don't live down by Gaza because we're going to come for you again. They have absolutely no intention of reforming or becoming any kind of a responsible element in Palestinian society. So for anyone who actually cares about the Palestinians, which Hamas does not, they should support this effort to eradicate them, because all they are doing is trapping the Palestinians in Gaza in this cycle of intolerable violence and extremism, and they have no opportunities to kind of revise themselves, revise their society, build anything new. That was what was sort of interesting about the AI video President Trump released last week. Yes, it was kitschy and campy, and we all saw Elon Musk eating hummus, on the shores of the Mediterranean, but it was a hopeful vision of what Gaza could be if the people of Gaza were de-radicalized, if Gaza were rebuilt. President Trump's the only one who's talking that way. And I think that to have that any kind of positive progress forward, you have to eliminate Hamas. And that's what Israel's going to do.
So, Victoria, with that in mind, let's go back to Judea and Samaria, where the Palestinian Authority is actually not much different than Hamas in terms of their governance and their tactics and the refusal to recognize Israel's right to exist. You do a comparison of the size. I mean, Judea and Samaria is like 24 times the size of Gaza. This whole notion that has been out there for years, going back to the partition plan of a two-state solution, it's not workable. When do we move on?
Well, I think that's the key question. And the reality is, Tony, that 50 years ago, when the Arab nations decided they were going to stop attacking Israel because it was expensive and painful and they lost over and over and over again, what they tried to do was elevate the Palestinians into something they're not, which is a nation state, and that there was some kind of equivalence between Israel and the Palestinians. However logical that might have seemed 50 years ago, at this point, it's not just apples and oranges. It's strawberries and sharks that we're talking about. It's totally different things. You've got a very successful, prosperous nation in Israel that's now one of the top 15 most powerful countries in the world, a technological leader, a bastion of democracy in the Middle East, and a great partner to the United States. And then you have the Palestinians, who are essentially a basket case. And, we just were talking about Hamas and Gaza. As you said, the Palestinian Authority is an utterly corrupt, defunct mechanism to attempt some kind of governance in Judea and Samaria. And I think that is what the burden has to be on our Arab partners, and particularly on the Abraham Accords countries, to step in and say this is unacceptable. acceptable. The Palestinian Authority is broken, and there's going to have to be some other kind of mechanism to govern the Palestinians, but they're in no way able to establish any institutions of civil society. They've failed utterly over the last 50 years to do it. They're dependent on international aid organizations like the United Nations because they can't organize themselves.
Right.
And so this fantasy of a two-state solution is utterly unhelpful at this point and should be abandoned.
So, Victoria, I'm going to go back to Iran and the nuclear weapon. All right. So, you look at Iran, you cannot see anything happening in the Middle East without Iran's fingerprints on it, almost. If you want this to settle down, I would think that you've got to deal with Iran, and what is making them a threat is the potential breakout with a nuclear weapon, nuclear weapons. Is this the time? Is this the moment, the window in time to deal with that decisively and set them back a couple of decades?
Well, this is going to be the critical question for President Trump. And as we're dealing with the dust-ups over Ukraine and the budget and everything, everyone should remember that the president is also dealing with this critical issue. And he's been very clear that Iran will not have a nuclear weapon on his watch. But, you know, that you can say that, but then what are you going to do about it? And the Israeli strike on Iran in October really did provide a window of opportunity because they exposed how worthless Russian imported Iranian missile defense systems were, that they can reach out and touch them. And with the additional U.S. supplied arms, you know, the question is, can they do it on their own? Is the United States postured to support Israel, not just on the day of any strike, but in days afterwards when Iran might retaliate? That's when they're really going to need help. And, you know, is the international community going to gather and condemn Israel or send them a thank you note if they do it, which is what they should do, as Israel took care of, you know, the Syrian nuclear program and then historically the Iraqi nuclear program. It was a great boon to the Middle East and preserved peace and prevented those rogue nations from going nuclear. If they have to do it again, we know they can, but that's going to be a decision for the president and the prime minister.
You have focused a lot on Iran. You were a part of the maximum pressure campaign during the first Trump administration. If you were advising the prime minister on this, how would you game this out? What do they need to be prepared for?
Well, they need to be prepared for, you know, a series of Iranian retaliations. And that's where, you know, the current kind of confusion over NATO is really unhelpful, because it would be great if that were to happen for us to have seamless cooperation, particularly with our British, but also our French NATO allies, to support Israel to counter any Iranian response, any response from their proxies. You know, Hezbollah and Hamas are pretty degraded, but as you mentioned, they do have forces in Judea and Samaria. And then there are always the Houthi in Yemen, who have been threatening to act up again if the ceasefire is broken. So for all of these reasons, you know, we need seamless coordination and support. And if Prime Minister Netanyahu is going to take an action, I would encourage it to be decisive. You know, we've been doing incremental strikes over the course of last year. We had the first direct attack from Iran on Israel. That sort of changed the paradigm a little bit, and then Israel retaliating. But I wouldn't do a sort of a small message strike at this point. That's been done. If you're going to go in and take out the nuclear program, we need to take it out and, as you said, set them back decades.
I mean, we are at a new level of direct confrontation, and so we're at a very volatile point, and the next move does need to be decisive. Victoria Coates, I want to thank you for joining us. It's always great to get your insight on what's happening in the Middle East.
Thank you, Tony.